challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. And what does it mean that I'm here? It means that it is time for the Thursday evening here anyway, edition of the live stream. Now, I know the World Cup has started, and I know that the World Cup is on right now, but very important to keep in mind that at this stage, these early rounds are really very boring. There's nothing of any interest in the World Cup until we reach the knockout stages. So there's no excuse for anyone to say, "Well, I'm not going to attend the live stream because I'm going to watch the Mexico South Africa football match," because there's no interest at all in the Mexico South Africa football match. Because at this stage, teams are just playing tactically. They're trying to build up points and trying to get through to the next round, and that's when the knockout stage. So no excuse. You have to attend the live stream. Now, there's a few things to talk about, and the subjects really this evening, they really are on the theme of is deja vu all over again. And I think you know what I mean by that, because we've had, over the past 48 hours, attacks on Iran by the United States, and of course we had a retaliation by Iran on U.S. bases in the Middle East. And then we had Trump issuing another one of his blood-curdling threats this morning against Iran, and then somebody says that he won't have the live stream to kick around forever. No, that's exactly right. You won't have this to kick around forever. So enjoy it while you can. But anyway, so the Trump then, just as he said, tonight we're going to absolutely pulverize, absolutely thump Iran. Trump then, a couple of hours ago, issued yet another truth to say, nope, we're very, very close to a deal, and therefore there's no point in my doing any bombing because we're very, very close to an agreement. And then, of course, who the hell knows? But in response, the oil prices went down, as is always the case, and then some people will be able to make a ton of money. And of course, by tomorrow, Trump may again change his mind and declare that he's really had it with Iran. They're just procrastinating. They're not serious, and he's not going to wait around any longer. He's going to start bombing. Anyway, here was the truths that Trump set out, and this was the one. This is the most recent one. The most dramatic, in that he's really suggesting that, well, we're very, very close to a deal. He says here, based on the fact that discussions with the Islamic Republic of Iran have been brought to the highest level of Iranian leadership and approved, I have, as President of the United States of America, canceled the scheduled strikes and bombings against Iran this evening. So this is one of these Trumpian assertions that have not been confirmed. I mean, he's saying here that the discussions have been brought to the highest level of Iranian leadership and approved. Iran has not confirmed that. I have, as President of the United States, canceled the scheduled strikes and bombings against Iran this evening. Discussions and final points have been, in both concept and great detail, approved by all parties involved. So discussions and final points have been in both concept and great detail. Them's big words, big promises. Bin concept and great detail approved by all parties involved, including the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Pakistan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Egypt, and others. Um, the naval blockade will remain in force. He always says that, in full force and effect until this transaction is finalized. Time and place of the signing to be announced shortly. So that's this. This is the classic Trump time and place. It's just a matter of putting forward the time. It's just a matter of deciding time and place. Maybe tomorrow afternoon. You know, so we're going to sign something. Now the problem, of course, is that however much one would like this to be true, I mean, we've been through this over and over and over again, and at an earlier stage, and maybe even at a later stage, I was kind of taken in by it, and I thought, well, maybe with negotiations, they do take time. I mean, it's not, you can't just come to an agreement overnight. You go backwards and forwards. You renegotiate something, and then renegotiate it again, and then you change your mind about some other thing. So then you think, okay, well, it's going to take time. Can't we, which no one's just going to come along, and say, hey, we've agreed on everything. We 47 years of animosity, aggravation, and actual war have been solved overnight. We just agreed on everything, so it's not going to happen. Now, one has to say though that um, because we've been through this so many times before, you obviously have to be very skeptical and very wary that we're not going to be talking like this tomorrow evening and saying, oh God, Trump has launched yet another attack on Iran. um it's a little different here in that he's saying that there's going to be a signing very soon. That's a little more specific than previously. And yes, he names a number of other parties, but he's done that before. Naming lots and lots of countries, and by naming lots and lots of countries, it seems like, well, everyone's on board. It's not just, if it's just U.S. and Iran and Israel, then it's not going to work. But if you get a lot of others on board, then maybe something can happen. But anyway, that's the situation now. It's good. No attacks scheduled for this evening, but this was the lead up to it, which was here was Trump. The fake news media refuses to report how effective the U.S. naval blockade is, the most successful blockade in the history of naval warfare. Nothing gets through unless we want it to. It's a steel wall. Iran is doing zero business, not paying their military or any of their bills, and quickly becoming a failed nation. Lots of oil is getting out, and then praise be to Allah and President Donald Trump. So this is when he gets particularly obnoxious, when he starts throwing around things like praise be to Allah. Since he's not a Muslim, why exactly is he saying praise be to Allah, other than to be as offensive and as insulting as possible? That was his earlier truth. And here you can see that underlying it all, there may be some calculation on Trump's part that if there is to be some kind of an agreement, and that there is the signing of an agreement, he has to present it as a win. So he has to present it that this is the result of my getting really tough. No one could be as tough with Iran as I was. And that through my toughness, through my coercion, we finally got a deal. So I think there's a reasonable case to be made that what he's doing here is just laying the groundwork for the subsequent justification, because he knows that if there is going to be an agreement, he will be criticized, and there's already a lot of this. He will be criticized for giving away the store, for being insufficiently uh, uh, tough with Iran, for not standing by Israel. So he has to say, look at all these things that we did. The only reason I got a deal with Iran is I destroyed their navy, I destroyed their air force, I destroyed their air defenses. That's all because of all these fantastic things that I did, that I finally got an agreement. So there is that. He is laying the groundwork for for some explanation as to why he pursued the this war, when it really was obviously very foolish and counterproductive. Anyway, this one. Oh, we don't. This is the fantastic, fantastic military, fantastic blockade. And then Iran is a complete and total mess. Much of it, like their Navy and Air Force, doesn't even exist anymore. They've been completely defeated. Iran is all talk and no action. Is it really no action? Well, the bully of the Middle East is dead. It's always amusing whenever the United States refers to some other country as a bully. I mean, yes, a bully. You picked a fight. You picked a fight on a country a quarter of your size, and you call them a bully. They've taken too long to negotiate a deal. That would have been great for them. Now they will have to pay the price. And then he goes on. Last month, I directed our great U.S. military to execute a secret mission to support oil tankers and other commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Today, I'm pleased to announce that this effort has resulted in more than 100 million barrels of oil making its way through the strait and into the open market. More than 200 commercial ships have safely traveled through the strait. This wildly successful effort is because the United States of America controls the Strait of Hormuz, not Iran. Their military is defeated and their economy is lost. It's over for Iran, and then so on. Now, I don't think that is wholly wrong, because I think that obviously oil is getting through, and that's reflected in the oil prices. The oil prices are, being maintained at less than $100 a barrel, which by historic standards isn't that high. So the only way they've been able to maintain the prices that low, leave aside the obvious speculation, the constant these declarations by Trump, and of course by Axios, that seems to have an entree into the Trump White House. These constant declarations that a peace deal is on hand. We're very, very close to an agreement, and that obviously, this is a regular thing, and it's every few days, and that helps keep push oil prices down. But I do think that the United States is getting oil out, and that by doing so, they're managing to maintain oil prices at under $100 a barrel. And here, it's $100, and then here, and then this is the one that he sent out this morning, which was the most belligerent, and which had all the media buzzing today. This is: the United States will be hitting Iran, whose Navy, Air Force, radar, anti-aircraft, and all other forms of defense, together with most of its offensive capability, are gone very hard tonight. So we'll be hitting Iran very hard tonight, uppercase, very uppercase hard tonight. At some point in the not too distant future, we will be taking Karg Island. So we'll be taking it. Very, very difficult operation. But at the same time, it's in the not too distant future. That's pretty vague. will be taking Kag Island and other oil infrastructure points and assume total control of their oil and gas markets, much like we have with Venezuela. And we're back to Venezuela. We're back to Maduro. We're back to Delcy Rodriguez. We have with Venezuela, which is working out brilliantly for both Venezuela and the United States of America. Even though it's obvious that the whole project, thinking Iran was going to be another Venezuela, was misconceived from the start. But he keeps coming back to that as if he somehow has nostalgia for his early ridiculous projects, which blow up in his face. And then here we have Scott Bessent, saying the Iranian regime will lose the zero sum game it is playing. Any damage it inflicts on our allies in the Gulf will be paid for with funds extracted from Iranian accounts. Any toll paid by the Persian Gulf Strait Authority will be offset by funds extracted from their accounts. Every attack Iran launches will only deepen the economic and financial consequences it faces. Um, well, that's all rather depends on what the shape of the final deal is going to be. That's a lot of big talk from Scott Bessent, but the U.S. government is going to have to get a court order permitting it to just help itself to the frozen accounts. I mean, it can freeze accounts, but it can't just help itself and decide where to allocate this money. So that's a lot of again big talk from Besson saying, "Oh, we're going to do this. We're going to doing reparations." Well, you can't just help yourself to this money, so you're going to have to get a court order. Now, maybe they can do it, but that all depends on how the negotiations are going to work out. Because Iran is absolutely going to insist on are going to absolutely insist on the return of the assets, not the sanctions, because that takes forever. To get the sanctions lifted, that's a major undertaking. But the assets, the unfreezing of the assets, that could be quite quick, and that's why Iran is absolutely insisting on the assets because it needs the cash fast. Anyway, here's the inevitable article from Axios. Trump cancels Iran strikes as mediators claim deal close. And then Trump announced that he canceled the planned strikes against Iran and claimed Iran's leadership approved a draft agreement that would extend the ceasefire, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and launch 60 days of negotiations on Iran's nuclear program, which is pretty much the same deal or whatever that they've been talking about for some time. 60 days extension of the ceasefire, reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. However, Iran obviously will insist, at a minimum, if you are going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, that you end the blockade. And Trump just keeps always very vague about that. But unless you end the blockade, there's not going to be any kind of a deal. Anyway, Trump has claimed an agreement was close multiple times before, and Tehran has yet to confirm his latest claim. However, three sources briefed on the talks told Axios that key gaps were resolved during the talks between Iranian officials and Qatari mediators on Wednesday. And the negotiations continued late into Wednesday night in Tehran as Qatari envoy Ali al-Thawadi and Iranian Foreign Minister Arakchi worked to bridge the remaining gaps between the U.S. and Iran. According to three sources briefed on the talks, the Qataris and the Iranians believed on Wednesday that they had reached an agreed upon text that the U.S. would also accept. And then the mechanism for releasing Iran's frozen assets, the most important issue for the Iranians, arrangement for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz during the 60-day ceasefire period, and then how negotiations of Iran's nuclear program will be conducted during the 60-day ceasefire period. So there's not going to be a deal on the nuclear question other than whatever is arrived at during the 60-day negotiation period. And then Iranian officials told several countries on Thursday that the Tehran talks produced an agreement in principle, but Supreme Leader Khamenei still needed to be given final approval. And the sources noted that both Iranians and Qataris had emphasized that the U.S. strikes overnight significantly increased Iranian suspicions about Trump's real intentions. So anyway, that's, I mean, it's more or less where we were a few days ago. You can certainly believe that Trump is being a little more specific here than before. However, you know, we've been here so many times, so many occasions that it wouldn't surprise me if nothing happens and we're back tomorrow to Trump issuing more threats. Anyway, so a couple of other things that I want to get to. So first of all, we have the resignation in the UK of John Healey, the defense secretary, and his resignation was triggered by his complaint that he wasn't getting enough money to he had to put him the UK military on a war footing. You said, hey, you promised me this, you promised me that. You said that we're going to spend all this 3%, 3.5% of GDP on military, and we're not anywhere close to that anyway. So he's made this resignation. Now, what's interesting that today the German defense minister made his particular blustery speech, as the Germans tend to do that these days, bluster about Russia, and so on, and how we in Europe have to be prepared for this Russian invasion, which is coming. Russia will be invading very, very sure. And so here's a story in Politico today. So this is the day on which John Healey announces his resignation. So here is the German army chief saying, "Yeah, we got to be ready. We got to be ready for the Russian invasion." There's a story in Politico. And it says, "We must be ready to fight. Germany army chief warns of rising Russia threat." It's always rising. And then Christian Freuding tells Politico that NATO allies agree Russia could be capable of attacking a member country by 2029. So they brought this forward now to 2029. Remember, it used to be 2030. But I guess 2030 just seems too far away. So they decided, well, let's make it a little closer. So let's make it 2029. That's only 3 years. That might get Europeans more focused and less annoyed about having to shell more money out on the military. So this is 29. Now notice how you have this weaselly use of the auxiliary verb could be capable. Well, anyone could be capable, but it's very hard to see how Russia could be capable, given that they are kind of embroiled in a war without any obvious exit in Ukraine. So they're fighting in Ukraine, which it's been going on now for almost 4.5 years. There doesn't look as if there's going to be any major breakthroughs on either side, at least not this year. So then you have to wonder if there are going to be no breakthroughs, and that's just simply the fighting in the Donbass. Not even fighting Ukraine. It's not like they're trying to take Kiev. I mean, that's just off the agenda. They're not taking Kiev. Um, so quite how, after all that, Russia would be capable of attacking NATO. I mean, it doesn't really make a great deal of sense, but it serves a particular purpose, which is to keep whipping up hysteria. You have to persuade the public to shell out money for the military, and the public isn't very persuaded. I mean, Merz, it's probably hey, Germany's going to be the biggest, strongest military in Europe, and Starmer made promises about how we're going to, we're going to have 3.5% of GDP is going to be spent on the military. And of course, where's the money coming from? So the only way you can persuade anyone to vote for this money is by whipping up this hysteria, completely nonsensical hysteria. Russia could attack us in 2029, maybe even earlier. Anyway, so this is the story in Politico. And then he says Germany must prepare for a Russian attack by 2029 or even earlier. This is the head of the German army told Politico. We have to be prepared. We must be ready to fight. This is Lieutenant General Christian Freuding, Germany's army chief of staff, said. He said that there's a broad Allied consensus that Russia could attack NATO territory before the end of the decade. So, you always wonder who is this broad Allied consensus? Who is it? The Baltic states, Poland, Germany, France, the UK, I guess, the usual suspect. But I don't think there's a broad Allied consensus. It's just the usual suspects. Anyway, 2029 is not a German timeline. It's a NATO agreed intelligence. That's very interesting. NATO agreed intelligence. Freuding said all 32 NATO partners agree that Russia might have the capability to invade a NATO partner country in 2029. Well, Viktor Orban didn't agree with that, but I guess he's gone. But I haven't heard Peter Magyar say, well, I think they're going to be ready to invade NATO in 2029. But maybe he'll say it. I mean, he's so anxious to get the money out of Brussels that he'll say anything. But he warned that Russia could move before then. Of course, it could move before then. Despite the war in Ukraine entering its fifth year, and Kiev saying that Moscow has suffered over 1.3 million casualties, as well as losing vast amounts of equipment. So this obviously, you're thinking, well, this doesn't make very much sense. You're saying that Russia could move before then, before 2029. And they're quoting Kiev. Obviously, they endorse what Kiev is saying. Kiev is saying Moscow has suffered over 1.3 million casualties, as well as losing vast amounts of equipment. So how exactly are they going to attack NATO when they've suffered casualties on this scale and they've lost vast amounts of equipment? Where's the equipment going to come from? Where's the manpower going to come from? Yet Russia is going to move before 2029. And then Freuding's comments come as European defense officials warn that Russia could rebuild enough military strength in the next few years to pose a direct conventional threat to NATO territory, despite its losses in Ukraine. So again, they could do that. Not they would, not that they will, but they could. For defense planners, 2029 has become a shorthand for the point at which Europe must close urgent gaps in readiness, production, and military capability. The general's remarks underscore the concern that Moscow could test the alliance while Europe is still racing to rearm. So Moscow could do it. They could go to war against the entire European continent, even though they can't take Donetsk. The 4.5 years they haven't been able to take Donetsk, but they're ready to launch hordes against Germany. Well, yes, all sounds makes sense. However, it turns out, despite the claims of this Freuding, it turns out that the United States isn't really buying any of this nonsense. Because I think the United States, or at least the Trump administration, has figured out um, that the Europeans are trying to push it into a war with Russia. So the United States just simply doesn't accept these wild, hysterical assertions on the part of the Europeans, particularly the sort of that little axis of Germany, Poland, the Baltic states, and the UK. And so this thesis has now been shot down. Also today was shot down by no less a person than the SACEUR, which is the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, who is always an American. So here's a story in the Financial Times. Says Russia not looking for conflict, says NATO's top US commander. So he's basically saying exact opposite to what the German top general says. Russia not looking for conflict. And that kind of is a common sense. So as I say, the Trump administration in particular really does not like the way the Europeans are trying to manipulate it into this war with Russia. So General Grinkevich remarks come as Washington withdraws key assets from Europe. And so here we have the US general who commands NATO has said Russia is not looking for a conflict despite concern among European allies about the potential security gaps left by Washington's plans to withdraw key military assets. Asked on Thursday about the possibility of a Russian attack on the Baltic states, General Grinkevich said his role was to ensure NATO's deterrence remained credible and that Moscow understood it could not succeed militarily against the alliance. So he kind of ducked the question, hey, aren't they about to launch an attack on the Baltic states? He said, well, the deterrence is credible. Anyway, I've watched the intelligence very closely. The Supreme Allied Commander in Europe said on a panel at this air show, the same air show at which this German general, blustered. So same one, same show. I've watched the intelligence very closely. Russia is not looking for a conflict. Again, the common sense approach. Of course, Russia is not looking for a conflict. Russia doesn't have the strength. It doesn't have the desire. It's never had the desire. And, it would be insane for Russia to want to start a war on the European continent. They do understand the term defensive alliance, and they do understand that we have a number of asymmetric advantages. So that's the hysteria in Europe, just kind of what might have expected. But I think it is striking, and that again and again, and we saw this very much during the most recent crisis over the drones, when it was clear, obvious, that the Baltic states and Poland were trying to push the United States into an armed confrontation with Russia over the drones. And the United States was saying, we're not getting into this. We're not buying the story about the drones. And you shouldn't be allowing your airspace to be used for Ukraine to attack Russia with these drones. So the Americans are kind of distancing themselves, at least on this. Now, it's also true that the United States is providing intelligence to Ukraine. So even though the Americans may not be happy with the use of the airspace, Baltic airspace, to attack Russia, however, the United States is very dangerously and very recklessly providing intelligence to Ukraine in order to hit targets inside Russia. So but they figured that the Russia will not retaliate against the United States. And I think that's probably, given the track record of Russia, Russia will not um, escalate by going after the United States. The United States is just simply too strong. But they might hit the Baltic states, and I think that's why the United States kind of shoots down, so to speak, shoots down, the pretensions of the Poland and the Baltic states, because it's possible that the Russians might get fed up and they might hit the Baltic states. And then there's going to be all kinds of issues. Well, Article 5, what are we going to do? And so on. So that's why the United States doesn't want the Baltic states getting involved. But the United States, however, does provide intelligence to Ukraine. But on the assumption, I think a reasonable one, that Russia would not dare to go after the United States. Russia would, however, hit targets in the Baltic states, might even hit targets in Germany, but he wouldn't dare to go after the United States. Anyway, so now let's take a look at John Healey, who I think, as we've talked about him before, he's another one of these really thick as two planks guys. I think we talked about him when the UK seized a number of tankers in the high seas, and he was blustering and saying how what a fantastic victory we've accomplished and so on. But the guy is as thick as two planks. Anyways, this is from his resignation letter, and is a House of Commons. Dear Keir, and then it says, "Oh, this is a letter I've never expected to write. I do so now with great regret and reluctance. I'm proud of what we've done in less than 2 years as a Labour government. We stepped up to lead internationally for Ukraine with a coalition of the willing and Ukraine Defence Contact Group, established Britain as a leading voice for Europe in NATO, raised defense investment to 2.5% of GDP 3 years earlier than anyone expected, launched deepest defense reforms in 50 years, won the biggest UK defense expo deals for decades, published a first of its kind strategic defense review, gave our armed forces the biggest pay raise in 20 years, boosted military morale, fixed over 1,200 of the worst forces' family homes, reset relations with European allies, and signed major defense agreements with Germany, Norway, and France. All right, so that's a little bit of throat clearing, and this is when you tell them what a fantastic job that we've done, but hey, we have to. It's not good enough. We need to do so much more. Yeah, we made a great start, but we got to do so much more because Russia poses this extraordinary threat. And then, so he then goes on. This is you have led this as PM, earning wide respect at home and abroad. Like me, I know you are exceptionally proud of our forces and all those who work in UK defence. We came into government recognizing Britain faced a new era of threat, which demanded a new era for defense. The SDR, this is the Strategic Defense Review, we jointly commissioned, set the 10-year vision to transform our armed forces, strengthen alliances, invest in the technology that is changing warfare, and back British industry to make defense as an engine for growth. This new era for defense required further investment through the Defense Investment Plan. So this is really the grounds on which John Healey decided to make his stand, and that this is why he's going to leave the government. The Defense Investment Plan, and there wasn't enough lolly in the defense investment plan. The excellent and extensive cross government work that completed in January, overseen by you, me, and the Chancellor, confirmed the scale of the challenge and the rising demands on defense. Since then, you have been unable, and the Treasury has been unwilling to commit the resources that the nation needs to defend the country at a time of rising threats. You always wonder what are these rising threats, and what against whom does Britain have to be defended? No one is seizing British tankers in the high seas. No one's bombing the United Kingdom. But Britain is seizing ships on the high seas, and Britain is, through the Storm Shadow missiles, is bombing targets inside Russia. So the warring is all being done by Great Britain and not by Russia. So to declare that somehow Britain is in great peril and we don't have enough to defend ourselves, well, all of the bombing, all of the fighting, all of the provocation has been coming on the British side. And so here he continues with this very eloquent letter, um, that since then the demands on defense have increased still further, as have the UK commitments you have rightly made to allies. Conflict in the Middle East, with the UK now leading the multinational Strait of Hormuz military mission. I didn't know there was a military mission in the Strait of Hormuz. Oh, okay. So the UK is leading this multinational Strait of Hormuz military mission. High North security, with the UK now leading the NATO's Arctic Sentry mission. Well, that's always also interesting. I mean, Britain is not an Arctic power. So you're now messing around in the Arctic, though you're not an Arctic power. Russia is an Arctic power. So you're messing around with Russia, which has obvious interests in the Arctic because its border with the Arctic is the biggest in the world. Arctic Sentry mission increased Russian activity toward the UK and NATO nations. So Russian activity, increased Russian activity towards the UK and NATO nations, and increased attacks in Ukraine, with the Paris Agreement confirming a British deployment to Ukraine after a ceasefire. Okay, well, that after a ceasefire, so that's not exactly going to happen next week. So why are we even talking about that? We have worked to secure a defense investment plan that does those things, that does two things. First, deal with the increasing operational demands on defense now and step up the SDR actions to meet the increasing threat. Second, set a clear path to meet the new NATO commitment. You agreed to spend 3.5% of GDP in 2035 through the next spending review. 3.5%. And then this gets a little hard to see, unfortunately. So bear with me. I know it is hard to see. As we have regularly discussed, I am certain that a headmark date for 3% of GDP on defense in 2030 is what Britain must set. This commitment would have strong cross-party support. Other European allies are stepping up in this way. I know how hard you worked to get to this point, blah, blah. And in funding the DIP, I fully recognize the strain this places on colleagues in other departments. And then, so then he goes on. You spelled out the threats last week. It is our intelligence assessment that the assessment of other countries in NATO that there could be an attack by Russia on NATO as soon as 2030. So there we are. We're back to there could be an attack on NATO by 2030. And even though, which we just heard from Sakur, the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, who says, "I don't think so. I mean, Russians aren't exactly stupid. They're going to start a war with NATO in 2029, 2030, or anyway." But nonetheless, so on the basis of this entire fantastical premise that Russia could attack NATO by 2030, on this basis, on this fantastical premise, he's resigned. That we're not going to be ready to face up to the Russian threat in 2030. Can you imagine anything as idiotic as that? 2030, we're not going to be ready, so I'm tendering my resignation. Now, obviously, he is making some calculations here. He may well be thinking that Starmer may not have much of a future ahead of him. We've got a by-election this time next week. Very, very exciting, and we're going to talk about it this time next week. And it looks like Andy Burnham, this hapless labor leader who had stood for leader of the Labour Party twice before, unsuccessfully. But it looks like he's going to win. Unfortunately, because the vote on the right is split between Reform, Nigel Farage's group, and Restore Britain, which is Rupert Lowe's group, and because they split the vote, basically Andy Burnham is going to win. And then once Andy Burnham is in Parliament, apparently there is going to be a leadership contest, and it's quite possible that Two-Tier Keir is going to lose, and Andy Burnham will be the next prime minister. So this is a very, very exciting that that Andy Burnham, whom the Labour Party twice rejected, once in favor of Ed Miliband, and once in favor of Jeremy Corbyn, twice rejected, and he rather sulked off and said, "Well, I'm leaving, leaving Parliament, and I'm going to do local politics." He became a mayor in Manchester and so on. But now he's going to come back, and presumably he's going to be hawkish. As of course, why wouldn't he be? He'd be very hawkish on Russia, and he would criticize Two-Tier Keir for not doing enough to fight Russia, and obviously this letter by John Healey will play a role in all that. Here, as you know what defense needs. You made the arguments for this powerfully in your speech at the Munich Security Conference back in February. Powerful speech. I don't remember a powerful speech by Keir Starmer. I mean, Keir Starmer is incapable of making a powerful speech. Without a DIP that meets the moment in this way, I am being forced to make decisions that would reduce the readiness of our forces and increase the risk to personnel on operations and would make the country less safe. All right, so he's gone, but in the campaign for party leader that Andy Burnham will wage, obviously, he's going to say, "Hey, Keir Starmer has left this country defenseless." So, and that is entirely to be expected, because in most countries, as you know, the political class in no way addresses the concerns of ordinary people, and so the things that the political leaders argue about and polemicize against one another and try to win political debates, the things that they do are of no interest to anyone else. So this notion that somehow Two-Tier Keir isn't doing enough to prepare Britain for this war against Russia This absolutely insane idea that Britain's going to be fighting a war with Russia in 2030. That's going to be the debate. That's the debate. And that was this point was really highlighted this week following um, the riots in Belfast. So we had two nights of riots. There may be more riots tonight, but there've now been 2 nights of riots in Belfast, and that came after the two live streams, Gaggle live streams, in which I addressed the case of Henry Novak, the horrific summary and opinion by the judge, and then I featured in another live stream. I featured the horrific, appalling nonsense to anti-racism to which the police in the UK have committed themselves to. So no sooner had public outrage been boiling up over the way the police treated a dying young man because they suspected him of racism. Apparently, they couldn't even care less that he was bleeding to death in their custody. But so um, and then when people learned about this anti-racist document, this written by half-witted, half-brained, nitwit, idiot sociologist, in some godforsaken university, Strathclyde University, and this kind of document is what the UK police committed themselves to, and why they decided to to believe the lies from a murderer and his lying family when they asserted that that he was attacked by racism, and chose not to believe the claims of a young man who's saying, "I've been stabbed and I can't breathe." The police just couldn't care less about that, but they did care about the claims about racism. But so no sooner did we get over that, then there was the case of this horrific attack in Belfast by a Sudanese man who was in the country legally. And this is very important to keep in mind. He was in the country legally. And so, because so much of this debate on immigration gets sidetracked on this issue of illegal immigration. So politicians can score easy points by declaring, "Well, I'm against illegal immigration. We need to crack down on illegal immigration." I don't know, no, I'm an enemy of illegal immigration. Yeah, they probably are. I mean, you can't get any politician saying, "I'm in favor of illegal immigration." Of course, it's illegal. You can't very well endorse something that's illegal. But the question isn't what's illegal. The question is what is legal. And so when you have somebody in the country who is psychotic, and he's in the country legally because he's asked for asylum. You just go in legally, you ask for asylum, then you're in the country legally. And so this Sudanese man, he was in the country legally, and then he attacked this person, a local person, who had a very kind of a Scottish name, Ogilvy. Ogilvy. You can't. It's a good old Scottish name. This is the local person, Ogilvy, who was attacked. Apparently, this person, Ogilvy, was trying to help. He was trying to help the Sudanese man. But what happens when when you're dealing with these psychotics. Same with the case of Henry Novak, who just engaged in some friendly banter on the street. Chances are you're going to be attacked with a knife, which is what happened here. And evidently, the Sudanese man had succeeded in gouging one eye out. We don't know about how far he got with his attempt to gouge his other eye out, but he clearly um, attacked him with a knife. I mean, he was on top of him and he was attacking his face with a knife, and clearly he seemed to want to slice Ogilvy's head off. Well, but anyway, I mean, people saw this. This was filmed, and some of the local peoples saved saved the man from a beheading. So the local people did more than the police. The police in the Novak case did nothing. They didn't. The man just died in police custody. So they did nothing to save the life of the victim. Here, at least, the local people saved the life of the victim by attacking the knife wielding Sudanese. But anyway, people watched this, and then there was uproar. I mean, what do you expect? People get angry. And they get angry because they're sick to death of politicians who repeatedly lie to them and engage in this whole thing about, we're against illegal immigration. Oh, no, there's no room for illegal immigration. We're not illegal migrants, illegal migrants. Um, but the public knows that you're not going to do anything about it. You're going to make all sorts of promises that you're going to crack down on immigration, and yet you don't do anything. And the Tories are the worst. I mean, the Tories are truly. I mean, if ever there's a kind of a low life scumbag organization, that's the British Conservative Party, because Boris Johnson, who stood as this conservative populist in 2019, he won that sweeping landslide in 2019, running as a populist. He's the one who oversaw the biggest migration into the country ever. He put to shame the the flow of migrants of the Tony Blair era, put to shame the era of the 1950s and 60s, and there's never been such a pouring of migrants into the UK as happened under Boris Johnson. So the Tories are the worst. But anyway, so the public exploded. That's what happens when people realize that there's nothing that they can do. They're not safe in their homes. They're not safe in their streets. They can be attacked by psychotics who for some reason are in the country. No one ever asked the people of Belfast, hey, do you want these people living next door to you? Do you want this Sudanese person living next door to you? Or in the case of in Southampton, hey, do you want these Sikhs hanging around you? The ones who like to wield knives, like to um, and and start stabbing people because they take offense at whatever. So nobody actually ever asked them, "What do you think about this?" And so they know they're not safe in their own streets, they're not safe in their own homes. And then the politicians just pontificate and pontificate, make all sorts of promises before elections. This is what they do, and then they break all their promises. And when you realize that your vote doesn't mean anything, that what you want doesn't mean anything, you don't count for anything. The people who are in Westminster couldn't care less about you. They don't care. They just regard you as scum. This uneducated, unwashed, dumb scum. Because they're much more preoccupied with really weighty issues like, hey, what are we going to do about Russia? What are we going to do about Putin? You see, they're more interested in Putin than they are about protecting their own people. So, the public exploded in Belfast, as the public exploded the day after the release of the footage of Henry Novak, and of course, even worse, when in 2024 the public exploded after the murder of the three little girls in Southport. And each time that happens, the political class explodes, not over the horrific murder that triggered this outrage. Now that they don't seem to, that doesn't particularly interest them. Not over that, but they explode over the expressions of public outrage, which is, no question. I mean, they did engage in, violence against property. I don't think there was any violence against individuals, violence against property. So they engaged in vandalism. They engaged in, use of nasty epithets, and so that provokes the political class because that's something they understand. That's directed at them. Henry Novak killed, couldn't care less. Some guy gets his eye gouged out, what do I care? But when these people are out on the street and suddenly they're angry, and they're not going to be fobbed off with meaningless platitudes about illegal immigration, then they do care. Then that's when they wake up. And then when they wake up, they get enraged. The politicians get enraged and threaten the public with draconian prison sentences, which is what they did after the riots in Southport. There were draconian prison sentences. And already people are being sent to prison in no time at all. I mean, there was, after what happened in Southampton last week, already people have been sentenced to prison. It's amazing how quickly the legal proceedings in Britain go. When they want to move, they move. So they've already been in prison. Doubtless there'll be people sent to prison in Belfast. And with this woman called Kemi Badenoch, another one of these absolute dimwits in British politics. She's the leader of the British Conservative Party. And Kemi Badenoch, you would think, that, hey, this might be a pretty good time for the Conservative Party, at least to distance itself from the dreadful Boris Johnson years, distance itself, express shame over what Boris Johnson had done to the country. And, this would be the time for her to criticize the government for not doing enough to protect its citizens. But instead, she kind of endorsed Starmer's, because Starmer also didn't care at all about the guy being attacked in Belfast. What do I care? But he was very, very upset. Starmer was very upset about the rioters in Belfast, just as he was very upset about the rioters in Southampton and very upset about the rioters throughout the UK in the aftermath of the Southport murders. And these rioters have a very simple message, which is, why are these people here? Did we invite them in? Why exactly are they here? And no one ever attempts to answer that question, because there's no answer to that question. Instead, they say things like, "Well, he's a Brit. He's a Brit." Like the guy, the Sikh, he's a Brit. Now, all of this comes about because of the very stupid way in which the British in particular, but other countries as well, British in particular, confuse citizenship with nationality. I mean, most civilized countries, most sensible countries, differentiate citizenship with nationality. So you don't come along and say to somebody, because he's lived in the country for 5 years now, because, he's a Brit, he's a Brit. Yeah, he's Brit. He's as British as you and I are. And so this Sikh, apparently Britain is has a long tradition of Sikhdom. It's a Sikh. That's the official religion of Britain. So you're a Sikh and you're a Brit. So they come along to saying that the Sudanese guy was waiting to become a Brit. He was he was applying for asylum. Once he gets the asylum, presumably it's just a few more years and he can become a British citizen in good standing. So this is where you get into this ridiculous claim that somebody is a Brit, and then people get angry. They get angry. Why are they here? Why are they endangering our lives? And because there's no good answer to that, how does the state respond? Well, the state responds by crackdowns and some serious prison time. I mean, there was really no violence in Southampton, and people are going to prison for 3 years. Anyway, so Kemi Badenoch, one of the great nitwits. I mean, you'd have to say, the Tory party has gone from one nitwit after another. Now, I think I see some people commenting about Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson probably is not a nitwit. He's just a devious, evil human being. Um, but Kemi Badenoch is she's a nitwit. And so her response was to say, yeah, yeah, I thoroughly agree with what the prime minister said about the rioting in Belfast, and now I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about. And so, what does Kemi Badenoch want to talk about? Yes, she wants to talk about Ukraine. I mean, why? What other subject would a Tory party leader want to talk about? Of course, she wants to talk about Ukraine because that's the most important issue for a Tory party of Britain, the English Conservative Party, then the National Party, the party, the One Nation Party, the one founded by Benjamin Disraeli. The nation. They represent the nation. So of course, well, I don't care about protecting the British people. I care about Ukraine. Like Annalena Baerbock, she cares about Ukraine. Merz, I don't care about the Germans. I care about Ukraine. So here is a sampling. This is and what I think is also very interesting um, is the way how the British and I talked about this on Tuesday, how the British handled the the Henry Novak killing. So what they did was they hid behind the statement issued by the family, the Novak family. The Novak family said something like, "Well, there's a scourge and knife crime in the UK which we need to address, and we're against anyone politicizing the murder of our son." And then the government said, "Oh, well, look, this is what the family said. We have to respect the wishes of the family. This is what this is the family. We only care about the family, the family." No, no, no. I mean, the family said they're against politicizing it. So then, look at this terrible person, Nigel Farage. He's trying to politicize it. The family said they're against politicizing. Now, there's a problem about that argument. There are two problems basically about that argument. I mean, first of all, the statement that the family issued was clearly drafted for the family by the government. It doesn't sound like anything that any family would ever say. It was obviously drafted for them by lawyers representing the government. And so the family was asked to read out the statement that the government drafted on to which they were supposed to adhere to. So that's one thing. The second thing is, because even if this was a genuine statement, and even if the government said, even if the family said, well, we don't want anyone to exploit the murder of our son. However much you can be sympathetic to the family, but it doesn't really matter what the family wants because this is a matter of public concern. This is a public issue. The public cares a great deal about mass migration. And so, irrespective of the family doesn't want to politicize it, and irrespective if the family thinks that this is all the problem is one of knife crime, which it wasn't, because in this case, this Sikh was allowed to carry a knife, two knives, as a matter of fact. But it doesn't matter. The public has a right to comment, irrespective of what the family's wishes are. It's a public policy matter. And the family's wishes are not the last word. Now, but the family did exactly the same thing. The government said, "Oh, the family, the family, the family," but they pulled the same stunt with the Ogilvy family. The Ogilvy. This is the victim of the knife attack in Belfast, who's now had one of his eyes gouged out, and he's in a coma. And of course, lo and behold, the family again issues a statement that the government quickly wants to associate with itself. So let's take a look at the statement issued by the Ogilvy family. And here it is. We are completely devastated by the horrific attack on our loved one on Kinnaird Avenue. Now, right away, right away, this was no family in the world, no family in the world would ever say anything like that. Our loved one. What does that mean, our loved one? Who refers to a member of their family, our loved one? I mean, you can say, whatever. You can say, I mean, he's the son of somebody, he's the brother of somebody, no doubt, grandson, maybe, whatever. But you don't say our loved one. Normally you would just simply refer to him by his first name. But you can see, well, who drafted this statement? Not the family. And so there it is. Our loved one in Kinnaird Avenue. This has been a massive shock to our whole family, and right now our only priority is being at his bedside and helping him recover. Fine. We want to say a profound thank you to the local people who bravely stepped in during the attack. Okay. Then your quick actions absolutely saved his life, and we will never forget what you did for him at that moment. We also want to thank the emergency services and the doctors and nurses looking after him. Fine. We are aware of the tensions and talk of protest following this incident. And then we want to make it absolutely clear that overnight unrest is not welcome and peaceful protest is the only way forward. Okay. So you can see that, all right, this is now right away, the issue there, uh, right, this is, we're against any kind of, protest, whatever. But then you can see suddenly where that goes. Clearly, the government that when drafting their statement, they have to go a little bit beyond that. And this, we have many migrants who make a deeply valuable contribution to our country. Who the hell talks like that other than Keir Starmer, other than Kemi Badenoch? We have many migrants who make a deeply valuable contribution to our country, including in our healthcare system and hospitality sector, and we depend on them to make our country work. Says who? You mean the country didn't work until you started bringing in mass migrants? Yeah, well, that's clearly what the implication is. We do not want this terrible tragedy to be used to divide people or fuel hostility. And there it is: divide people, fuel hostility. This is classic claptrap from the British government. And so you can see how they hide behind family. The family, we care about the family. What if the family said, and some families do in fact say that, hey, I don't think you, the government, I don't think you, the police, have done anything to protect us. Because that's what many people said over the grooming gangs. There were lots of families of the victims of the grooming gangs who said exactly that. Hey, I don't think the government did anything to help us. I don't think the government did anything to protect us. I don't think the police did anything to support us. I don't think the police chose to believe the grooming gangs than us, who we were just dismissed as slags. And that's the word that appeared in those reports. So, in that case, the government doesn't hide behind the statements of the families. So very selective. Which families do you want to hide behind? Anyway, here then is well, then because we're asking the media, so on and so on. And then here's Ed Davey. And you want to go, who the hell is Ed Davey? Well, Ed Davey is the leader of the Liberal Democrats. So he went in for a Twitter storm, and of course, as you can see from his Twitter storm, the only thing Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, the only thing he was concerned about is the rioters in Belfast. Much as the only thing he was concerned about was the rioters in Southampton last week, and then at the end of last week, The only thing he was concerned about was the intervention of J.D. Vance. And suddenly we had this, I talked about this the other night, we had this fake, phony, ridiculous patriotism that we're indignant about the intervention of an American vice president in in an internal affair. We don't want any lectures from the U.S. vice president. We're pretty damn good in how we administer justice. We have the finest police force in the world. Didn't you know the British police force is the finest police in the world? We don't want any lectures from any Yank. So Ed Davey went in for that last week with over J.D. Vance. So here we are. And then he talks about Healy's resignation, and then saying again, stop repeating the mistakes of the conservatives and get serious about funding our armed forces properly. We cannot afford years more political chaos while our national security is put at risk. That's what he cares about. He doesn't care about protecting his own citizens. Oh, our national security, because Putin. That's who really threatens us. Putin. The scenes we saw in Belfast yesterday were horrific, and people are right to be concerned. So that's it. The right to be. The scenes he's saying, he's not talking about the scenes, the eye gouging, the attempted beheading. No, that wasn't what he's talking about. The government must take action against tech billionaires like Elon Musk, who control the divisive and harmful social media algorithms that are inciting violence and hatred. Oh, of course, it's all the fault of Elon Musk. It's all the fault of social media, because if it weren't for social media, nobody would know about what we have been doing for decades. So, therefore, we need to crack down on social media. The last thing we want is anyone getting information. The government must take action against tech billionaires like Elon Musk, who control the divisive and harmful social media algorithms that are inciting violence and hatred. So if it isn't the fault of Trump, then it's the fault of J.D. Vance. If it isn't the fault of J.D. Vance, it's the fault of Putin. Putin is the ubiquitous figure. It's always to blame. And if it's not the fault of Putin, then it's the fault of Elon Musk. It's always somebody to blame. Not what have we done over the past decades in bringing in so many people, despite all of the objections, the obvious objections that have been going on for years about this, about mass immigration into the United Kingdom. All of the objections, which were ignored. So, but rather than address that, well, let's make it about Putin. Let's make it about J.D. Vance. Let's make it about Trump. Let's make it, of course, about Elon Musk. And then I am horrified. So this is another tweet. Another tweet. I am horrified by the disorder and racist violence in Belfast last night. Far too often now we see extremists exploiting people's anger and grief to spread hatred and violence with the help of divisive algorithms on social media. This has to stop. So you can see what it is he cares about. And again, there is another tweet. The attack in Belfast yesterday evening is deeply shocking. Okay, my thoughts and prayers are with the victim and his family, and my thanks go to the emergency services. And then the police must be allowed to conduct their investigation. And then, you can see this is a pro forma. He really doesn't care. You can just see it's pro forma. Police must be allowed to conduct their investigation. Who's preventing them from conducting their investigation? And that's it. So that's just this guy, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. I mean, I could have, if I was sadistic, I could have had some quotes from Keir Starmer, could have had quotes from Kemi Badenoch, but I just chose Ed Davey. Anyway, let's now, before we go on to another topic, if we have time, but yeah, let's now go to the the Gaggle Locals board, the Gaggle Locals page, which is where the Gagglers, the gaggling community, comes and and make sure that the dogs are looked after, that the dogs are taken care of, and that so that we won't get too upset over the lack of movement in the tip jar. But as I always say, if you want to interact with me, if you want me to answer your questions, if you want me to address your comments, please join our board, and it's a great community, um, very well worth your time, very well worth your effort, and it's the gaggle.locals.com. And then if you join the Gaggle, then I will absolutely address your questions and your comments. Anyway, the first question is from Aubergine. So Aubergine, very generous. Thank you so much, Aubergine. Says good evening, George and Gagglers. I regret that I will miss tonight's live stream, so please accept this humble contribution as penance. Okay, we accept, Aubergine. Thank you so much. Very generous of you. But don't make this a habit. But anyway, thank you, Aubergine. And then Danaki says, since Danaki, one of our most prolific contributors, who continually posting on our Gaggle Locals board, says, since this was much more fun than today's fakest of fake news and the fakest of fake wars, let's continue. Who are your favorite historical personalities from Russia, Europe, and America, and why? Those are all very interesting questions. Like if you say, who are my favorite personalities? Well, when you think about the um, some of the figures in Russian history, obviously, you kind of have to admire some of the reformers who tried to avert the revolution. So somebody like Alexander Witte, but however, the crash industrialization that he presided over was always going to be a dangerous proposition, because of course, if you do have a crash industrialization, you are going to create a very large industrial working class. Now that's okay. I mean, the industrial working class, that certainly is, their incomes are higher than the peasants. But the problem was, of course, with the industrial working class of Russia, is that they were thoroughly infiltrated and propagandized by the Bolsheviks. And so that became a source of vulnerability. So in one sense, you have to admire Witte for what he did, even though in a way he proved to be a gravedigger for Russia. And of course, you had Stolypin, who I think he did attempt to address, and particularly the great source of vulnerability in Russia, about the condition of the peasants. And I mean, peasants basically are a very conservative force, and they've proven themselves in history. They're a conservative force, so you should be able to, any halfway skilled politician should be able to get the peasants on board for a conservative agenda. They didn't do that in Russia. Louis Napoleon, better known as Napoleon III, of course, got the peasants on board, made them all into small-scale farmers, and then they became the bastion of conservatism in France. Something like that could have been done in Russia, but Russia had just so many problems. But the evidence is that his policy was succeeding, which is why he was assassinated. So, again, maybe if it had a chance, if he had avoided assassination, something similar could have happened in Russia. We could have built up a solid kind of bourgeois conservative force in Russia that would have saved the country from Bolshevism. Um, then I have to say, and I know you're not going to like this, and I don't like it myself, but the measure of somebody like Stalin, however terrible, he was without question a terrible ruler in the sense he was responsible for so many unnecessary deaths. However, he did leave his country much stronger at the end of his life than he found it at the beginning. So, if you come out of that war, the great victor of the war, and you're essentially presiding over the at least the second most powerful country in the world, terrifying Europe. Everybody was just terrified of the Soviet Union in the late 40s and early 50s. Then you think, well, you've done something. I mean, however cruel your leadership had been, if you leave your country stronger at the end of your rule than it was at the beginning, then you have been a successful leader. And a leader who leaves his country weaker than it was at the beginning is a bad leader, is an unsuccessful leader. Stalin, by that measure, would be successful. Now, you know, he, however, laid the foundations for the unraveling subsequently of the Soviet Union in all sorts of ways. When we've talked about them, there was no necessity for him to absorb the Ukrainians. He should have left the Ukrainians as a problem for somebody else. Bringing them all into the Soviet Union was a disaster. But you could say he, to the extent that he managed to frighten and intimidate the West, then you say, well, that's fairly successful. And I think this is a point that came up when we had Sheila Fitzpatrick on. She said that for Russians, one of the reasons why they look back nostalgically to the Stalin era, even though they obviously don't want the repression, the gulags or anything like that. They don't want that to come back. But they see it as one of the few times that their country had become a true force in the world. Russia was, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, whatever you call it, was basically one of two superpowers. That's never happened before. Russia had been always among the great powers, but always among them. It was never number one, it was never number two, not even number three or number four, but it was among the great powers. Suddenly, it had become a superpower. And then by the 1970s, the Soviets kind of achieved, this was already 20 years after the death of Stalin, the Soviets achieved this remarkable feat of having the same level of military power as the United States had. This is unheard of. This has never happened for the Russians. So if you look back on that and say, well, that's a pretty impressive accomplishment. Now, all that was then tossed away for reasons we can't go into. Why was all that was tossed away? But nonetheless, whatever the cruelties of Stalin's rule, he did build up Soviet power, and he managed to intimidate and frighten powers that had been historically Russia's enemies. Germany was cowering before Stalin and his successors. So then obviously you'd have to go into question of why did the structures that Stalin had built up, why didn't they last? Why couldn't there be some kind of an evolution to a more I don't know, a more humane, more accommodating system? The way China did. China also abandoned the 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 lunacies of Mao, and those were lunacies. Stalin didn't entertain lunacies. Mao did. Mao's communism had loony aspects to it. I mean, Stalin's communism was much more rational. But nonetheless, the Chinese managed to retain the elements of communist rule, but managed to develop also into a kind of a formidable economic engine. And so the question is, why didn't that work in Russia? But just in terms of, okay, if you just measure, Stalin comes to power around 1925. The Soviet Union is weak. The leadership is divided. It has no idea which way to go, whether to continue with Lenin's new economic policy, whether to go with the collectivization, industrialization policy. The leaders were all divided. No one really knew who would be who deserves the title of Lenin's heir apparent, Lenin's successor. So it was a weak, divided leadership beset by enemies. All the imperial powers were kind of eyeing the Soviet Union hungrily. They didn't think the communist system would survive the death of Lenin, and so that was what it was in 1925. 1953, Stalin dies. Only 8 years earlier, he had gone into Berlin as a kind of a conquering hero. So that's what. So I say, I have to be positive. Say, well, if you measure people by their historical accomplishments, rather than were they good men, bad men, were they cruel, nasty, whatever. But by that measure, I think Stalin's accomplishments have to be um, taken seriously. Anyway, so that's Russia. Europe. Well, that's a very good question. Who I like? I guess my favorite would probably be kind of a European historical figure. Probably somebody like Bismarck. I think it was very hard to do what he did. He had to manage to unite these quarreling principalities, statelets, into one um, cohesive state, Germany. That was not easy to do because all of these principalities had their they all had their royalties, and they wanted to retain all their royal prerogatives. They didn't really want to join a a nation state and subordinate themselves to the rule of Berlin. So it was difficult to achieve that, and he did it. He turned Germany into the dominant power in Europe, but he was smart enough to realize that, well, having accomplished this, now everyone's going to look at Germany with real fear and trepidation, and in no time at all, a coalition of powers will be developed directed at Germany. So Germany actually had to divide its rulers, make sure that that there was never a coalition of powers that could unite against Germany, and in their union would prove to be stronger than Germany. So that's when he famously said, there are five great powers. Germany is safe as long as it's in any three of the powers. It doesn't matter what the three are, but as long as Germany is with the three rather than with the two, then Germany is safe. And of course, after he was gone, Germany was indeed one of two, with Austria-Hungary, and the three were united against Germany. So he was smart there. He was very smart also to keep Austria out of Germany. So he made the Kleine Reich, the small Reich, rather than the Große Reich. So he managed to keep Austria, and he knew that there was going to be a problem. If you bring the Austrians in, you bring the Slavs in, you bring the Hungarians in. That was always going to be a difficulty. So he made sure that the Germany that he created was remained a cohesive nation state, roughly. I mean, it was not entirely. It had problems. It had the Poles were still there, but it could have been worse. So and of course the way he did it, the way he waged those quick, decisive wars in the 1860s was really a master, a political technician and a master kind of military tactician. So the defeat of Austria, the defeat of Denmark, and then of course the prize, which was the defeat of France, which nobody really thought that Prussia would defeat France. The defeat of France in 1870. You'd have to, all of these were just brilliant and deft moves by him. So I'd say he's a favorite. And of course, in his case, once he was gone, once he has disappeared from the scene, Germany was not able to capitalize on his accomplishments, and Germany gradually got itself into more and more trouble, the very trouble that Bismarck had warned German leaders from getting into. And then America, well, I think I'd have to say probably Richard Nixon. I think he was, I think in the 20th century, probably one of the most successful presidents. And he also, uh, uh, you know, uh, he took over at a time of deep divisions. I mean, if you go back to 1968, America really seemed like it was just breaking apart. I mean, there'd be nothing similar in recent years. I mean, it really looked like the country was just splitting up into civil war. Um, and then there was that war in Vietnam, which just seemed insoluble. And there didn't seem to be any way to extricate the United States out of it without a complete abject humiliation. He did all of that. He brought a certain measure of social peace, and he extricated the United States from Vietnam. And then, of course, he developed this very subtle, very sophisticated international system of great powers. I think most people didn't really understand what he was doing. Those people just went in for the schmaltz, and Kissinger played up the schmaltz. Hey, look, I'm meeting Brezhnev. Oh, look at me, I'm meeting Mao. Oh, and I think American media, love that kind of schmaltz summits, and so on. But Nixon, I think, understood that he was kind of establishing a framework for peace in which the great powers ensure that they're not going to go to war against one another, and therefore there is stability and security for all. And I think Nixon understood that, and the media didn't. Kissinger was just, he was just a party goer. I mean, he's a bright guy, but essentially he was a party goer. Wanted to go out with good-looking women. He liked the celebrity. It's like the pudgy professor who suddenly becomes a kind of a celebrity, which he never thought. And I think Kissinger went in for the schmaltz, but because the media were never able to acknowledge that it was really Nixon's vision that really propelled the détente policy, the opening to China. That was Nixon's vision, because they just didn't. They disliked Nixon. They disrespected Nixon. So they had to make up this fantasy story that it was all Kissinger. Kissinger was the mastermind of all of this. But the problem is, there's no evidence in any of Kissinger's writings before he became National Security Advisor and ultimately Secretary of State, that he ever envisaged that kind of Nixonian geopolitical framework. Nixon, on the other hand, did envisage it. And there are writings in the 1960s, a famous Foreign Affairs article in 1967, where he did talk about an opening to China. But the media had to play up, and they still do, however annoying it is, they still play up the whole idea that, oh, this is all Kissinger's policy, Kissinger's foreign policy. Kissinger was a party goer. He loved celebrity. As I said, he was a pudgy professor, certainly smart. I don't deny that he was very smart, but the universities are full of smart professors. He was hardly unique in being he's a smart professor. but he didn't enjoy this. Kissinger had been he had been in the Kennedy White House because he was a professor at Harvard. Mac Bundy, who was the dean at Harvard, he kind of liked Kissinger, so he brought him on to work at the White House. But the Kennedy people just didn't take to him because the Kennedy people, they were kind of athletic, good-looking, waspy types who enjoy sport. They enjoy competing against one another. They were just they looked athletic. When you looked at those, that if you want to see what waspy America looked like, you look at the people who surrounded Kennedy: Mac Bundy, Bob McNamara, Douglas Dillon. Um, Dean Rusk and all of those people. Anyway, Averell Harriman, you go through all those. Galbraith, these were the Kennedy people. Kissinger didn't fit among them. He was this, pudgy Jewish professor. And he wasn't very happy among the Kennedy people, and he left quite early um, during the Kennedy administration. But Nixon liked him. Nixon, for some reason, actually rather liked him. And so Nixon brought him on. And then, he kind of, became this celebrity. The media made him into a celebrity, but only because they were unable to acknowledge Nixon's own accomplishments. So that's I think Nixon would be my favorite, and I just also like his personality. He had a certain, there was a kind of darkness to Nixon, right? You get a sense of this in his post resignation interviews. He didn't really have the I don't know, there's some of the sort of the triteness, the vacuity, the platitudes of somebody like Obama or Clinton. Clinton again, he was in it for the money and the women. Obama, money and celebrities. Most presidents are like that. But Nixon never had that. Nixon was never really interested in any of that. He was, as I say, he had a certain darkness to his personality. He was also, unlike most presidents, he enjoyed reading. He enjoyed intellectual stimulation. He spent a lot of time reading books. Again, long after he had ceased being president. So I don't know. So that's I kind of like I like him. Anyway, I hope I've answered your questions. Thank you so much, Danaki. And now we have Robert. Very good to see you, Robert. Always happy. Thank you for your generosity. And Robert says, now we can analyze what the political elites of different states do, but the Rothbardian argument is that their actions can only ever interfere with, block, or disrupt the coordination and cooperation made possible by markets. No better dramatization exists than the U.S. missile attack on an Indian oil tanker. Yeah, that happened yesterday. The market organized people into a vital productive purpose. Trump and the U.S. state instead play the role not even of pirates, but only of dangerous and barbarous vandals. Well, it's very that's a very interesting idea, because whenever we talk about the origins of wars, what causes wars, and so obviously people want to say what caused the First World War, what caused the Second World War, Korean War, Vietnam War, and there are never any satisfactory explanations as to why states engage in war when you can get what you want through much easier ways, because most states are run by fairly rational people, and so you should be able to do it. Now, you had the sort of the Leninist theory, the Lenin, what's the name of the guy? Rudolf Hilferding. The Rudolf Hilferding. He did the famous essay about imperialism. Capitalism leads to imperialism because capitalism cannot generate markets. It cannot generate stability. So capitalism needs markets for its goods. And then Lenin gave it a twist, by saying, yeah, but in this search for markets, the capitalist states come into conflict with one another, and therefore this is the cause of wars. So that was the kind of the Austrian school. There's a Rudolf Hilferding, and then Lenin gives it that his famous essay that he wrote during World War One. What was it Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism? I think that was the title. Well, I mean that was a thesis. It was never very convincing, because again, why can't you just work all this out among yourselves? Why do you need to destroy one another? So it wasn't a very satisfactory explanation. And then Schumpeter, I think, yeah, it was Schumpeter then addressed that particular problem. He dismissed the sort of Leninist idea that capitalism leads to imperialism, and that leads to conflicts among the capitalist states, and that's the cause of war. He said, no, on the contrary, the cause of wars is the preservation of, or not so much the persistence of the rule of elites, the pre-capitalist elites. So, if in other words, if you had businessmen and industrialists running the country, then there wouldn't be wars. But because you have the various aristocrats and the feudal lords, or the progeny of feudal lords, because they still run things, therefore you're going to have wars. That they will always have wars, because that's how they used to run things. So as I talked about Schumpeter last time, I think again in attempting to answer your question before, because Schumpeter was very pro-capitalism, but he just didn't think capitalism had a future. There were just too many forces arrayed against capitalism. So I kind of agree with you in that they that when it comes to Iran, and when it comes to what happens in the Persian Gulf and so on, all of these problems can easily be solved. And it was the same with the Iraq War, when people tried to present an explanation for, well, why did George W. Bush invade Iraq? So it wasn't at all obvious what was the reason for that invasion. I mean, Iraq posed no threat to the United States. Saddam Hussein was obviously a spent force. His days were long behind him. He was done. He was finished. What was the need to reason to attack Iraq? And so, people put forward a thesis that somehow it was about the oil. But that story never really made any sense at all, because there's no shortage of oil in the world. There's none. I mean, there's an oil glut. There's an energy glut. I mean, just about anywhere you go, there's energy glut. There's coal, oil, nuclear power, gas. I mean, the huge shale gas boom in the United States. So there's no shortage of energy. So therefore, what is the cause of the wars? Well, then you'd have to say that there are indeed powerful forces. I wouldn't put it in the Schumpeterian way, but clearly there are powerful forces, whether you call it the deep state or very influential groups of people who push for war. I think they pushed Trump into this war. I think he didn't want to do it. I think they pushed Trump into it. It's the same group of people who have been pushing a war with Russia. Because again, why the war with Russia? There are no outstanding conflicts. There are no conflicts at all between Russia and the Europeans. There's no conflicts between Russia and the United States. There's nothing. There's no reason at all. There's money for everybody. There's abundance of energy. Russia is a market for European, especially German industrial products. So there'd be no reason for the war, other than there are clearly powerful interests who want it. And there were powerful interests that wanted that war with Iran. And there are the powerful interests who don't want any kind of a settlement. And that's why whenever Trump sends out these truths that we talked about earlier, whenever he sends them out, What's the response? The response is from the same group. This is in this case, the Israel lobby, but it goes together with the military industrial complex types, the think tanks, the Washington glad handers. Hey, you can't allow this to happen. You can't allow the rulers in Tehran to get away with it. And and if there was ever going to be any settlement with Russia, these powerful interests are going to make their voices felt. And they don't have to now because we're nowhere near any kind of a resolution of the war in Ukraine. But Trump keeps talking about, hey, we're going to bring this thing to an end, and right away, Mark Levin and all the rest of them start screaming, no, 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 we don't want that. We want war. Um, anyway, I certainly agree. I don't think it's about capitalism. I don't think it's about resources because there's no shortage of resources. Um, I think that there are very malevolent interests that that push for war. Anyway, thank you, Robert. Robert always helps raise the intellectual tone of the discussion. So thank you. And Vic Shakapopoulos says, "Dear George, are you going to root for any team in the World Cup? There are so many teams in this edition of the tournament, but it's hard to find a team I would support. Maybe Iran. That's not a bad idea. Maybe Iran. I mean, normally, well, not normally, but in terms of the logic, I usually support Hungary. Now, the problem with that is that Hungary hasn't qualified for the World Cup finals since 1986. So it's now 40 years since Hungary has actually taken part in the finals of the World Cup. And even then, Hungary had always done very poorly. So Hungary didn't qualify for the quarterfinals in 86. It didn't in 82 or 78. I don't think Hungary qualified at all for the World Cup in 1970 and 74. So the last time Hungary really did anything in the World Cup was in 1966 when Hungary reached the quarterfinals. Now, admittedly, at the time, there were only 16 countries taking part. Now it's, I think, is it 48? I think it's 48 now taking part. So it's just very hard, when it's the European tournaments, the European Nations Cup, whatever it's called now. It used to be called the European Nations Cup. It's called something else now. Pretty much every European state qualifies. So Hungary takes part there, and I usually support Hungary. But again, Hungary is very weak, and Hungary is not going to make it through to the knockout stages. So that's Hungary out of the way. Now, normally, I mean, I agree with you about Iran. I mean, I might support Iran. I don't know whether Iran, at least I would support Iran in the early stages. I don't know whether Iran would actually reach the knockout stage. I'm not sure how good Iran really is. So then we go to the among the Europeans. If Russia were taking part, I would probably support Russia. I rooted for Russia in 2018, though again it wasn't a terribly strong side. I obviously I can't support France. I can't really support Germany. I kind of I like I like some of the Latin American countries. I like Brazil and Argentina, but they Argentina, I think, is an aging team. I think it kind of revolves around Messi, and I think Messi is obviously past his best. So I don't think Argentina is going to retain the trophy. Brazil's always worth following, but they haven't really. The era of the Brazilian dominance in football really is a long time ago. I mean, he won the World Cup in 58, 62, and then 1970. So that's three times they won it within 12 years. But since 1970, they only won it twice. They won it in 1994 a very unimpressive Brazilian team, but they won it on penalties in '94, and then they won it again in 2002. I think that was in Japan, but they haven't won it since 2002, and so I don't think Brazil can defeat the European teams. I think the Europeans are just are stronger and more tactically intelligent than Brazil is. I mean, you know, I mean, I always remember one of the I think the best World Cup was I think 1982 when Brazil was again fancied, and it was a beautiful Brazilian team, and and I think they were far and away the favorites. So that was in Spain. They were the favorites to win it, and then but they played Italy, um, and you know most people were expecting Brazil, including me. I was expecting Brazil to defeat Italy, but Italy just outsmarted Brazil. You know, outthought Brazil. They used very shrewd tactics, and in the end, Italy kind of swept Brazil aside. And then you think, well, this is really the problem with Brazil. They do play beautiful football, but ultimately they tend to get outthought and out strategized by some of the better European teams. Italy, however, is not in this World Cup, which itself is bizarre because Italy is one of the football powerhouses of the world. But this is the second successive World Cup that Italy um, hasn't qualified in. So Italy would have been a team that I would have supported had they been there because I think I like the way they're kind of smart and the way they pace themselves. I always like the way they always start slowly and then build up their momentum as they reach the later stages of the tournament. I always think that's just they're very smart in how they handle it, but they're not in it. Bosnia and Herzegovina kind of knocked out Italy, and that might be a team that I would support. That might be, see how well Bosnia and Herzegovina does. Croatia, I'm not a huge fan of Croatia, but I might if they start reaching the later stages of the tournament, I might support them. Whom would I not support? I would certainly not support England. I always detest England, even though I like the coach, the German coach of England, Tuchel, who I think is a very smart guy. You know, he was the coach of Chelsea. Was very smart as the coach of Chelsea. So I like him, but I don't like England. I don't like Scotland for the same reason. I'm certainly not going to support France. I'm not going to support Germany. Not a huge fan of Spain either, but I don't quite have so much animus towards Spain as to England, France, and Germany. So who we're left with? I mean, I'd be happy if, say, Brazil and Argentina went on to do well in the tournament. I'd be happy if, say, Bosnia and Herzegovina went on to do well. But I'd be very miserable if England and France and Germany sort of divided up the honors among themselves. So, but we'll come back next week and see how it's going. So anyway, thank you, Vic, and then Cynthia. Always good to see you, Cynthia. Cynthia is our film scholar, film expert, film specialist, with an amazing encyclopedic knowledge of cinema history, and an amazing propensity to understand the intricacies of film production and the work of directors and cinematographers and producers, actors, wardrobe people, all of the complexities that make up the creation of cinema. So she has amazing expertise, and here at the Gaggle, we are the fortunate beneficiaries of her expertise. So that's why I always say to people, hey, please join the Gaggle, because one of the perks that you get to enjoy is Cynthia's extraordinary cinematic knowledge. So we have our screenings every Monday. We have the Gaggle movie night, and we always have something good. And this week we're featuring a Polish film from 1959, Night Train. Well worth seeing. It's an unusual film, so it has a very different vibe to other films that we screen here. It very much brings back, you know, memories of the kind of films that were made in Eastern Europe in the 1950s and 60s, and very much of the atmosphere of the communist era of cinema. And of course, this is something that Cynthia has a great knowledge of, and she has quite a lot to say about this film, Night Train. Please watch it. It's on our board, and as you watch, um, read and derive a great deal of enjoyment from Cynthia's commentary. Anyway, Cynthia, thank you for your generosity. Cynthia says Iran is pulling off a brilliant move in the Strait of Hormuz, dodging tolls by calling them green fees. Yes. This clever setup mimics their deal with China, where ships pay for upkeep rather than transit. By framing it as eco protection, Iran perfectly weaponizes the carbon tax rhetoric of Western elites love to lecture about. You'd think green obsessed European leaders would cheer. Instead, the West is furious. They love climate penalties until a rival outsmarts them using their own playbook. I think that's absolutely right. Um, and you're right. Uh, if they were to charge a toll, that would run afoul of international law, the law of the sea, the Convention on the Law of the Sea. So Iran is very smart in avoiding that. So they said we're not going to charge a toll, but we will charge an administrative environmental fee because we have to protect the environment. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz, 20% of the world's energy goes through the Strait of Hormuz. It's quite a narrow waterway. So it's a very busy waterway, and therefore there's a lot of cleaning up that needs to be done. So it has to be maintained, and that costs money. So we're going to maintain the Strait of Hormuz. But because the Strait of Hormuz is divided up between Iran and Oman, Iran is smart enough to say, well, we'll collect the money, we'll collect the fees, but we will share it with Oman. And the goal of this money is not, hey, let's spend it on building up our country. The goal is to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is kept clean and safe and environmentally friendly. So I agree with you, Cynthia. This is a very smart move. I don't think they're going to abandon it. The Americans can huff and puff, but I don't think they're going to abandon it. And I think the Americans could keep the war going if they want to, but this war isn't very popular and not going particularly well, and it's likely to drag on and on. So what they might try to do is to take Iran to the International Court of Justice. I actually don't think that's going to happen because, first of all, the United States hates the International Court of Justice. The ICJ has more than once ruled against the United States, and the United States has more than once ignored the judgment of the ICJ. And of course, the ICJ is no friend to Israel. So, but the ICJ could certainly give a ruling as to what Iran is doing is in accord with international law. So, I'm not sure there's much the United States can do. They can either go to war and keep up the bombing, however unpopular that is in the United States and everywhere else, or they can just turn a blind eye to it and say, yeah. I mean, this is as long as it's about keeping the Strait of Hormuz safe and clean and protected. We don't really mind. Um, but I don't think the U.S. has any other option, because the ICJ, which other countries might go to, is something that's an anathema to the U.S. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. But as I say, I agree with you. It's very, very smart. Clearly, the leaders in Tehran are very smart people. They're absolutely no fanatics or anything like that. They're very, very smart. They're very shrewd, and they're thinking, several steps ahead. Anyway, Summer Petra says, okay, okay, no, all right, that's broken up. And anyway, then Cynthia says, Zelensky's letter to Putin brings to mind Monty Python's Black Knight, who loses his limbs but calls it a flesh wound. Zelensky channels this absurd defiance, facing years of brutal war. His letter still projects total dominance by mocking Putin's age and demanding a face to face summit. He downplays Ukraine's own heavy toll. It brings to mind a delusional stand where a battered leader claims victory, like the limbless knight shouting, "I'll bite your legs off." He refuses to yield an inch. No, I think that's true. The problem is that Zelensky has been encouraged in taking this stand. So he goes on, and you think the rational, sensible policy would be to bring this war to an end. Because everybody knows, and everybody has always known, that Russia has a special relationship with Ukraine. Russia is never going to allow Ukraine to be in NATO. I mean, that's a matter of a vital existential security interest of Russia's. So therefore, some kind of accommodation had to have been worked out years ago. Could be worked out now. And it's the same thing. I mean, like the United States is not going to allow missiles to be deployed in Cuba. It just isn't going to happen. The United States isn't going to allow missiles to be deployed in Mexico or in Canada. Those are red lines. And you may not like it, but that's it. And so the same thing goes for Russia, and Russia is going to insist on this. So Zelensky and his enablers, however, refuse to accept any of that, and they want to continue this war. Now, we know why the Europeans want it. We know why Merz wants it. We know why Kaya Kallas wants it. We know why Starmer wants it. Somebody else is getting killed. They're not getting killed. Their people aren't getting killed, but somebody else is getting killed. And it's weakening Russia. Russians are getting killed. Nice. So that's why they want it. But the appalling thing, the shocking aspect of it is that Zelensky, who you would think would have the interests of his own people foremost in his mind, that basically, I don't want my own people to get killed. That's not how he sees it. Zelensky seems quite happy to preside over the slaughter of his own people. And that just seems completely reckless, irresponsible, and horrific. It's like it's a nightmare of a leader. Now, the Ukrainians, of course, haven't had a chance to vote in an election for some time, and it's very important that they're not going to get a chance to vote for years and years. Again, the West is quite happy to continue with this state of affairs where there has been no election in Ukraine now since 2019. 7 years, more than 7 years since the last election. And Europeans are happy with it. So if there's no election, no one gets to decide, do we want this war or not? Ukrainians don't get a chance to decide on that matter. So Zelensky has basically a carte blanche to keep the war going. He doesn't have to face the voters. Because if he had to face the voters, I think the voters in Ukraine would say, enough, we don't want this war to go on. But they're not going to get that opportunity, and the Europeans are going to make sure that they don't get that opportunity. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then Summer Petrus says, having learnt the style of speech and enunciation of John Healey, the former UK Defence Secretary, you must be devastated by his resignation today. I don't think it makes any difference. Starmer is damaged goods, but probably quite a smart move on his part. He will probably get reappointed by the Starmer clone replacement. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I talked about it a little earlier. I think Healy probably thinks, again, I don't see any reason for the resignation other than to ingratiate himself with probably the next prime minister. Um, I think it's now quite likely that Andy Burnham will win the by-election next Thursday, and then he will be in Parliament, and then that will force Starmer to hold a leadership contest, and I think Starmer will lose. No one really likes him. No one finds him appealing as a leader. I think he has such an insipid personality, like like a wet dish rag, that Labour would be happy to see the back of him, and then Healy will be rewarded, or at least that's Healy's calculation, that he will be rewarded. You often have to keep in mind that British politics has always been very treacherous, and therefore the one who puts the knife in isn't necessarily the one who's going to get rewarded. I remember in the case of the downfall of Thatcher, the initial attack on Thatcher came from Sir Geoffrey Howe. So because he attacked Thatcher in a speech in Parliament, which was really quite devastating, because Howe had been a senior Tory minister, and so he openly attacked Thatcher in Parliament, and that led to the leadership contest. So who threw his hat into the ring was Michael Heseltine, very, very oleaginous, horrible character, very rich, but always truly repulsive. He'd been in the Heath government, just a repulsive character. But he was the one who challenged Thatcher for the leadership, and his challenge was clearly sufficiently successful to to compel Thatcher to step aside. I think Thatcher really, the support for her just began to evaporate, and that in the second round of the voting, there was really a growing likelihood that she would lose to Michael Heseltine. So she stepped aside, but Heseltine did not become leader. Nor did Sir Geoffrey Howe. It was left to a loyalist, a Thatcher loyalist, John Major, who became prime minister. So something similar could happen to John Healey. Healey may think that he was the one who put the boot in, the one who stuck the knife into Starmer just in time for next week's by-election. But don't count on Healey being the next leader of the party, and don't count on him getting a senior position from Burnham. I think he'll probably get, if he gets a position at all, I think he's going to be demoted. And the reason for that is that nobody likes someone who's treasonous and traitorous. Because if he betrayed Starmer, so Andy Burnham will think, hey, he's going to betray me. That's why what was that expression? I think it's Shakespeare that I think it's the one that none dare call it treason, because I can't remember the exact expression. The point of it is that is at the moment you have the who's treacherous. That's the person who's going to betray you. I mean, that's it. Anyone who betrays one leader, he's going to betray the next one. Anyway, so that's my view. So I do think Starmer is done. I think Burnham will be the next prime minister, but I don't think John Healey is going to get much. And then Aristotle, thank you so much, Aristotle, says, Norm MacDonald, quoting Norm MacDonald, what terrifies me is if ISIS were to detonate a nuclear device and kill 50 million Americans, imagine the backlash against peaceful Muslims. I'll read this out because I was laughing too much. Okay. What terrifies me is if ISIS were to detonate a nuclear device and kill 50 million Americans, imagine the backlash against peaceful Muslims. Yeah, no, that's right. That's the most worrying aspect of it. And And you can, if it's happened in the UK, the speeches in the House of Commons would write themselves. However, 2-3 million citizens of the UK have been killed, and Starmer and Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davis will all be speaking about now is not the time. Now is not the time for any kind of anti-Muslim sentiment. And anybody who engages in any anti-Muslim activity will have the full force of the law deployed against him. And I will make sure of that, says Keir Starmer, the former chief prosecutor of the UK. We're going to really lash out at anyone who's engaging in anti-Muslim activities. Yeah, no question. But anyway, thank you so much, Aristotle One. And it is now time for here it is. Here is it. This is the quote I was trying to remember. Treason does never prosper. What's the reason? For if it prosper, none dare call it treason. It's very profound. I'll read it again. Treason doth never prosper. What's the reason? For if it prosper, none dare call it treason. Exactly. So that's right. So anyway, thank you so much. Let's let Days In live. Okay. Thank you for that. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you very much, everybody who joined me for the Thursday night live stream. Thank you to everybody who contributed to the tip jar. The dogs are going to start making their feelings felt very shortly, and they're already getting into a pretty foul mood because they're already sensing summer is disappearing, the cold weather is coming back, and they've had it. They're sick of it. So the the so thank you everybody, and over the weekend we'll do some more podcasts, and then Monday morning East Coast time we're going to have the joint live stream with Peter, and then I'm back on Tuesday for the Tuesday night live stream. I hope to see you all then. Really appreciate your being here, and see you very soon. All the best. Good night. Bye-bye.